So I think Taylor took half of my content. Um, it's a great talk. I don't know what I'm going to do now, but we'll just wing it, okay? Two talks in a row by CISOs. Probably not what you all expected at a technical security conference, but we'll give it a shot. As Steve said, I'm the CISO at Brex. Brex is a fintech. Talk's called Purple. It's greater than red plus blue. A lot of it's just about methodologies, frameworks, mostly about mistakes I've made in my life. Please don't make them. I'll share them. And we'll talk about some of the failings and some of the successes. So pretty much standard kind of presentation agenda. I'll introduce who I am, although Steve did a pretty good job. Talk about the industry. I might get a little bit into ranting and issues that I have with the industry, but I'll try to stay away from most of them. I'll talk about my past, mistakes, failings, things like that. And there's a section on integration, and it's really about how I thought about integrating security programs, security culture, with some specifics around red team, blue team, and purple teams, and how it's worked. I'm going to talk about Riot Games, but I'm also going to talk about Brex and what I've done there. I think it's fair to say most people are more interested in video gaming than finance. So I'll try to talk more about Riot Games. Do we have any video gamers? Anyone play League of Legends? Anyone play Valorant? No one? Okay. Like, video gaming gets pretty toxic, so we have some fun stories. And then we're going to wrap it up. So as Steve said, I'm pretty old. We met a long time ago. It was actually 2010, I think. My first kind of experience with technology was an Amstrad CPC 464, which most of you have probably not heard of, because you're all younger than me. Favorite game was Shinobi. I studied math in college. I did a bunch of science courses, worked my whole way up to GSE. I met Steve on like the very last one, which is the GSEC. And after I did the GSE, I had pretty much like the dream career opportunity, which was to build a security team program and culture from scratch in 2013 for Riot Games in Europe. I made a ton of mistakes, but I learned a phenomenal amount. And then I got like a bigger role and I transferred to California. If you've ever been to Ireland, everyone's like, it's super green. There's a reason it's super green. Rains about 250 days a year. I've lived in LA for 8.5 years. I don't even think I've had 100 days of rain. So, you know, much sunnier place to live. I left Riot. I joined Brex, led all the security team, and now the CISO. And alas, here we are today. So why do most people get into cybersecurity? I don't like the name cybersecurity, but I've accepted that that's what it's called these days. So it is what it is. You know, I lost that war. Still fighting the cryptocurrency war. So it's really around like high demand, job security, you know, buffer overflows, wrap chains, you know, doing cool stuff, learning challenges, stopping bad guys. And there's like a lot of diverse career paths these days, like especially as the industry has grown. The one thing that's not actually here is, hey, I want to go and lead teams. I want to build teams. I want to like figure out how to like make a better security program, right? If you go to most conferences across the world, it's all about really cool stuff, but there's very rarely like someone going, well, here's how you do it, and here's how you don't do it. I can tell you a lot about how you don't do it, and that's what we'll talk about today. So as I said, it's not a technical talk. Don't hate me, but like people are harder than technical problems. Okay? So, you know, you all might look down on your engineer manager, your CISO, your director, but like they have a pretty tough job. There's a reason they've either no hair or a lot of gray hair. So yeah, people, building teams, serving the business. A lot of the stuff I talk about may not work in government or like a 3-letter agency. I haven't worked in either, so I don't know if it's going to work. So my assumption is that it may not. And this was me preparing. Like everyone else, I severely leveraged AI. I stole a lot from ChatGPT. Want to thank him, you know, or her in advance for all the help. So the industry. What is the red team? What is the blue team? What is the purple team? Taylor already answered this, so we're just going to skip this slide. But, you know, offensive team that simulates cyber attacks to identify vulnerabilities. test incident response, ethical hacking, penetration testing, etc. I think everyone's familiar with that. Defensive team that analyzes attacks, develops ways to prevent and mitigate them. Blue team members monitor systems, etc. Perform incident response. Again, all pretty obvious. Then it's like purple team. Facilitates communication and collaboration between red and blue teams. And this kind of makes me go like, WTF. I'm like, why do you create a team so the two teams can like speak together? And I'm like, that's insane. And you're all probably like, oh, that is insane. I swear to God, like I've seen this so many times where like the most amazing people are so clever, but they literally cannot talk to like another human being. Or they can, but they can't talk to the person like, you know, the defender. So yeah, I was like, this is weird. Like we can't have this. However, I did have this. I'm gonna take water because my mouth's gonna get really dry if I don't. So a lot of this presentation is story time. But I think it was like about 2016 when I moved over to LA. We wanted to really mature like our defensive side of things. So previously we had like a small counter threat team. As I said, video gaming's pretty toxic. You get a lot of threats. You get a lot of like really mature 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds saying things they really shouldn't after they've lost. It's always lag, it's always latency, it's always someone else's problem. You know, so, but as the company was maturing, we wanted to have a proper blue team. Like many sort of like security engineering teams, we made the really clever decision of building our own log analysis pipeline and data analysis, and we went full elk, so elastic log search, and that didn't really scale very well. We eventually corrected that decision, but that's just like one micro example of like, you know, we kind of got away from what was important. We hired, you know, SOC our security analysts. We evolved like an actual red team, but it was never really purple. And I don't fully know why. I think in some ways, well, I do, but I don't know why we did this, the things that we did. But like we recruited from the industry, we had referrals, you know, official job ads. But then like the worst thing we did was we created sub-teams. So within the actual SecOps, you know, blue, red, purple team, we actually created sub-teams. And that immediately, like just by default, created like confrontation and created conflict. And it resulted in like so many, you know, other challenges. So from like a team leading or team building perspective, like that wasn't a good idea. And as a result, it ended up like this. It was super adversarial, and they weren't really working towards like the same North Star. They didn't have the same roadmap, which was just dumb. Haven't done that one since, thankfully. But we kind of let like, you know, I think one of the things when I was originally building security teams and programs, I never wanted to be that security team in the corner. Like when I was a DevOps or an infrastructure engineer, I used to dread when my security team were coming because they were typically coming with a Qualys scan for an Apache vulnerability when our web servers were Windows running IIS. And like those things just happened. But what happened is like I over-indexed in terms of being incredibly audience focused, delegating a lot to like the SMEs, and not always providing like explicit direction or, you know, saying no earlier than I should. And I think that's just one of the sort of lessons as you get into a leader. So these are the type of things that we saw. We saw like in incidents, the red team wouldn't share IOCs or TTPs. They would, when they did like the report, they'd send it to the boss or the boss and the boss's boss rather than actually sharing it with like the blue team. So then when they were also like running services, like they may not give the blue team logins, for example, to their tooling or their services, you know, which is just like super bad from a collaboration perspective, from a knowledge sharing perspective. And it almost felt like they had this goal of making their blue team colleagues bad, you know, which is absolutely stupid. But it happens more often than not. And I think that's like the surprising thing. Like I still see it despite being in the industry over 20 years. And then like the final thing, like not just having separate teams, but also different roadmaps. and everyone feels, super high level of ownership over their roadmap. But at some point, as a leader, you have to make the call and make sure the teams are all working towards that like same North Star. So like, as a result of that experience, this became my philosophy, and I'm Irish. So in Ireland, asshole is not a curse word. So I'm gonna say it, but like, don't be an asshole. Like it's the number one rule. And I see it consistently over people that want to show, hey, I found this buffer overflow on the stack that was like super cool. So they go to the like point of embarrassing the product vendor over, not realizing that everyone makes a mistake. And like, that's not the way to basically bring about future collaboration or actually reduce the security risk for us all. Now, we did it slightly differently with the anti-cheat team, which were another sort of team that was under me. And I would love to say that I did it with intentionality, but I didn't. I basically looked out. And it was later on that I reflected in terms of like how we built this. So the manager for this team was actually not, like he was technical, but he was not an engineer by trade. And this is one of the most technical teams I've ever run. And literally what we did is we basically just built the team to be one big team, to the point I think there were like 10 or 11, maybe 12 at one point, reporting to that same manager, which is actually too much. But as a result, they had like huge collaboration. The breakers were defending, everyone was building. So we had like software engineers, people writing in assembly, God help them. C++, also God help them. Some people, on the services side of things, so luckily for them, they were writing in Go. And then we had like data analysts, and we also had like some threat analysts, and we had all these people like working together, and it was because they had the same North Star. And the same North Star was actually to have high level of integrity in the game. Like, there's a various amount of things that gamers hate, lag, latency, losing. They hate having to install extra software, but what they truly hate is a very low level of game integrity, because then they don't know like why they lost, like was someone cheating? And once you lose that like feeling of ownership or responsibility, you end up leaving the game. But the point is that there was a common business goal. And yes, video games do have business goals. It's not just about making cool experiences. And this team was like super well aligned to it. And that was pretty eye-opening to me. So like the type of things that we did Pac-Man, which was Ring 3, user level anti-cheat software that was basically installed with every single League of Legends binary that shipped. We did Vanguard. Oh, Vanguard. Vanguard was Ring 0, Ring 3, and a services layer, microservices layer running in the cloud. Obviously, because it was a device driver on Ring 0, it had to be signed by Microsoft, which was another experience. But ultimately, in order to play Valorant, you had to install this software, which is incredibly invasive. Riot Games was owned by Tencent. Tencent are Chinese. This was like 2019, 2020 when the US president was going off on like anti-China stuff. So it was like a really good, really good time because we were accused of installing Chinese spyware. But ultimately, it worked. And there was high game integrity. It increased the player numbers. The game was massively successful. And because our goal was like about high game integrity, the direct consequence of that was like more revenue for the company, so better business goals. So again, don't really think about it, but like this anti-cheat team was super aligned with what they were trying to do and what they were trying to do for the company. So they had blue team folks, they had attackers, and at the end of the day, their goal was to secure the company, secure the product, and help the business succeed. Like the goal wasn't to like hack the employer. Long time ago, I remember a friend of mine, we paid for, he worked for a big four company, we paid for them to come in and pen test our internal services and network and stuff. This was when I worked at a retail bank. They hacked the CTO by installing a keyword logger on his system. And they were like super happy because they were, in their view, successful. But it actually ruined the whole thing because the CTO literally just didn't want to talk about it. and so we didn't get any value out of the actual exercise. He would have been better doing something else. And while it's a cool story to share on Twitter, it actually didn't help the business. Cool, so 19 minutes left. Integration. So just to recap, because I've been talking for a long time, why do security teams exist? Why do red teams exist? Why do blue teams exist? Why do purple teams exist? To serve the business, reduce the security risk to the business and the customers, make the secure way the easy way, right? Like, so a developer comes in, they want to integrate the CI/CD, they want to build something, they want to ship a product, put security in there so it's there by default. It's the same for the finance person, it's the same for the HR person, but make security like invisible, make it frictionless. And then, I know we're not here to talk about compliance. I've avoided compliance all my life, and then I became CISO, and I had to understand it. And PCI, SOC 1, SOC 2, GDPR, all those different things, like they're actually obligatory. Security isn't. Security is entirely optional. So, one of the sneaky tricks is like, you may hate these compliance standards, but you can leverage them to get what you want in order to reduce security risk. So how did we do this integration? Well, at Riot, we had this concept called RFCs, which is modeled on the sort of like more well-known RFCs. And we would go through like, each RFC was at a different scope. Security operates at a global scope, so we would seek adoption at a global scope. And these would be like super hard to do. So for example, we might write 100 line RFC, and we could have 650 lines of comments and feedback, and then we would iterate. And we do all this in public. And the benefit is like, it would take longer to get the adoption, but once we got the adoption, some of our biggest critics were our biggest champions. So when we actually went to implement and get those things adopted, which honestly included things like putting Pac-Man along with into the League of Legends binary, like shipping Vanguard, we had like total alignment, and the product teams were our biggest champions. Whenever we messed up, we did it publicly. It was super hurtful at the time. There was one time I took down, there's like a feature within League of Legends called Clubs, and I took that down on a Friday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, which was 7 p.m. in St. Louis, which was 1 a.m. in Dublin. So yeah, I didn't. Thankfully, I did that in year 3 or 4, as opposed to year 1. But it's always a Friday night, right? But we actually took that RCA and we did it transparent, and we did it in public, and we took all the feedback, and we actually built like a strong relationship. We integrated red teaming directly into our launch process. We iterated on that integration and came up with a thing called SPL. So basically, when you integrate into like the launch process, when you're launching games, you're basically launching a full data center. So every time we launched the full data center, we were launching a geographic infrastructure, and we basically integrated the red teaming of it when it was about 80% complete, and that needed like a tick, so that it was passed before it would ship. Secure product lifecycle is something basically that every product that ships has to follow it. It's a product-orientated and audience-focused version of like SDL, but it was integrated at the start of the lifecycle. So because we got in the start of the lifecycle, we enabled much more collaboration and much more partnerships. And then it was literally just like iterate, 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 iterate. So we continued to get better. And like this was basically after the RCA in 2016. And I think this meant so much to me because we were truly seen as engineers. We weren't seen as like that team in the corner. And I joined Brex after 7.5 years at Riot. So I had all these learnings, and I was like, I want to get back to that same spot. Like I want to be at the spot of like 2020 at Riot, not at the spot of like 2013 at Riot. So Brex is a much smaller company. The team is smaller, and that has advantages and disadvantages. One of the advantages was that I was able to put red and blue teamers into the same team. So they have the same rituals, they have the same tooling, They have access to all the same things, the same code bases. We actually took the SPL that I built at Riot and modified it such that we went even further to where engineers are. And what I mean by that is we basically went right into the engineering design doc. So you couldn't ship your engineering design doc without having the security review section. And then we built tooling around the whole thing so that you would click a link on the engineering design doc. That would generate a security review form. From that form, once you hit submit, that would actually generate tickets, and it would generate a Slack channel, and it would generate tooling. So basically, everything was made frictionless and as easy as possible for the engineers. And that's just like worked incredibly well. And I think it's because the team has been smaller, plus I made a ton of mistakes at Riot, that we were able to do that. And ultimately, they all report up to the same manager who reports to me. So it removes a lot of like he said, she said. It keeps everyone aligned on the same like North Star. And it also means that if you're a defender, you get to do offensive stuff. If you're doing offensive stuff, you can also do defensive stuff. And a lot of the time, they actually collaborate on the security reviews. So yeah, this is basically what I was talking about in terms of we go where engineers are. But we've integrated the secure code reviews, not only like through the CI/CD pipeline, not only through the actual pull request, where we will actually do proactive warning, and we can actually block the commit. You want to block the commit very rarely, and you want to be right when you do it. But we do that. But the really amazing thing is like when we actually do the pen testing, and the developers actually see it, and they see like the red teaming, it's pretty amazing because it's sort of like Pandora's box has been opened. Whereas previously, I think security as an industry generally just didn't do that. And I was like, you don't need to know, we're going to sit in the corner. And it's like a whole flywheel process because it actually goes right to like vulnerability management, which is incredibly blue team. But I actually have the red team running the vulnerability management process with our GRC, right? If you think about what I said about compliance, every time you have vulnerabilities or every time you have audits, you need the vulnerabilities. Here they are, here's when they were logged, here's when they were being worked on, here's how we hit SLA. It's like all the boring stuff, and we literally have tooling all around that. But it's super useful because the red team and the GRC folks are actually working together consistently every single week. So we do this like once a week, takes like 5 to 10 minutes. It's like super easy and super quick. And like the tooling and collaboration just makes it much easier. Okay, I ran through that really quick. One of the successes that I haven't actually talked about, and I can maybe talk about it off camera a bit more, but when we got things a lot more stable at Riot, we actually kind of like integrated the SecOps blue team and SecOps red team a little bit more with the anti-cheat team because they had a lot of the common like threats. It wasn't like a formally, actually still reported to different people, but we got them working together on like sometimes like projects, but also like incidents. So writing something like Vanguard and like shipping a ring 0 sort of device driver to like 100 million people is actually pretty cool. But I think that one of the other cooler things was that those teams evolved to such a state that they were actually collaborating on like threat analysis, incidents and stuff, such that they stopped 2 school shootings, and they also found a missing child, which was like pretty amazing. So I don't think I'll ever beat like the highs of those, nor will I beat the lows of those, but like that's, when you see teams working so effectively like that, it's pretty cool. Cool, so what is a blue team? What is a red team? What is a purple team? For me, they're not a team. It's a way of operating. And I really believe that builders, defenders, attackers, analysts should all work together. And they should have that like common mindset and the same like methodology and framework. So wrapping it up, I firmly believe security is here to serve the business. If the business didn't exist, security wouldn't exist. And I think many people forget that. And a lot of the time when we do like incident analysis or we do reports, we're not actually thinking of like who the audience is. So we should be 100% audience focused. I think when we give people bad news, we should actually do it with empathy as opposed to being an asshole. Because it's a long game. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You're going to be working with like multiple of these people many times, not just at that company. It's like a super small industry. And, you know, if you offend one person, it's okay. Like, but once you start offending 3 and 4, word gets around, regardless of whether or not you're actually having any effect in the company. Truly believe that with tooling and building things into rituals, building it into like where people are, making security the default and as frictionless as possible is the only way that you can succeed. And then I think like you got to be like super feedback orientated. Some of the feedback is going to hurt, but unless you actually listen to it and iterate on it, you're never going to be able to, you know, have a success or achieve those things or show value of security to the business. I think that's it. So yeah, in honor of League of Legends, you know, work together. That's it.